We're ready to go? The book of Daniel. So we switch over. So let's turn to it. So we're trying to read it. We've read most of it. We skipped. I just want to remind you, we did skip one part. We skipped the part of Belshazzar's feast and the Mene Mene Tekel Upharsin or Phares on the wall and the finger of God and that you've been found wanting and all of those things. But it wasn't important for the thrust of the book. It was important as a story of when it happened and how, and you could read it yourself. But I just want to remind you, but we've read most everything else. And I believe, if I'm correct, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we read chapter 10 last time. Is that true? Or did we stop at chapter 9? Because I didn't check. I apologize. But I thought we did 10. It was amazing. But let's just remind ourselves of chapter 10 and where we're going. And that's the third year of Cyrus. Remember we talked about the fact that this is probably a number of years after Babylon has fallen, because Darius the Mede ruled it for a year and then Cyrus took over, so it's probably about 4 years since that Belshazzar feast. So in the third year of Cyrus, a thing was revealed to Daniel, whose name is called Belteshazzar, and the thing was true, but the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. And verse 5, he lifts up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man, clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body was like the beryl, his face as the appearance of lightning, his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. Isn't that glorious? Who's he seen? Who do you think he's seen? He's seeing the Word of God. He's seeing Jesus. I, Daniel, alone, verse 7, saw the vision. For the men that were with me saw not the vision, but a great quaking fell upon them, so they fell to hide themselves. And I was left alone, and I heard the voice of his words. And a hand touched me, verse 10, set me on my knees and upon the palms of my hands. So where was he? He was like flat on the ground. And then he got up in a crawling position, as we call it, or just up on his hands and knees. He said, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you and speak up and stand upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. Then said he unto me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day you did set thine heart to understand and chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. And then he talks about the fact that the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Who's the prince of the kingdom of Persia? Now remember, just before this, we'd seen that vision of the goat and the ram. And the ram was the Medo-Persian Empire, and the he-goat was the Greek Empire. And the prince of Persia would be the angelic being who ruled over that principality. He had authority to give his little minions more power than everybody else had. You know, you ask the question, why was Alexander the Great able to defeat armies larger than his that should have defeated him at every turn? Why did he keep winning? Well, for reasons like this, because the prince of Persia withstood him, the angel that wanted to come. He says, verse 14, now I am come, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. So he had to stay there for a while, because they were fighting an angelic battle, apparently. Now I'm come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. And when he had spoken such words unto me, I set my face toward the ground, and I became dumb. He couldn't speak. And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spake and said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the vision my sorrows are turned upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? Now listen to that for a moment. How can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? He's going, I'm your servant. How can I talk to you? Okay, That's what it says. For as for me, straightway there remained no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me and said, O man, greatly beloved, fear not, peace be to thee, be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then said he, Knowest thou wherefore I come to you? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. So how did Alexander the Great win? Because the angels of God went and put down the prince of Persia so the prince of Grecia could rise and take his little minion and run over the whole chessboard. Okay, and that's what happened. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holds with me in these things but Michael your prince. I don't understand angelic warfare. I don't understand how many there are. You can read about it in the book of Enoch. The trouble with the book of Enoch, it's not in the Bible for a reason, because there's a lot of stuff in it that probably was not inspired and things that were added later, and it gets a little mixed up. But the reality is there's a lot going on in the spiritual realm that Enoch dealt with way, way back at the beginning that's still going on at this time. And Daniel's seeing a little bit of it. We don't understand that very well, and people will dispute all of it, but look, the angelic world is much more populated, it seems, than ours, because there's myriads of angels. There's a lot of them, and there's a lot of demonic forces and a lot of fallen angels, and there's just a lot going on, and there's not a class on all of that, but the Bible has a little bit to say about it, and you could learn about how these things work. But understand that much of the movement that we see then in the head of gold, down to the arms of silver, down to the thighs of brass, down to the iron, is because God is making things happen. He's setting up and putting down. And so he'll go and send he said, go take that guy and take him down so the other one can rise. Then he'll let the other one rise and have its day and do its thing. So that was the point of that whole chapter, helps us understand. But what is the vision that he's talking about? It's what we're going to read in chapter 11. So all of this is about getting to the vision of chapter 11. That's what is happening. So before I read it, that's not entirely true. Forgive me, chapter 11 is before that, but it's the one at the end. Because remember, the third year of Cyrus is the end. I just misspoke, forgive me. Let's remind ourselves of the Greek Empire. This is the one with the goat and the 4 horns. And we said that one horn was definitely Egypt. One horn is definitely the eastern part. We call it the Seleucid Empire, which we're about to learn a lot more about. One part is definitely Macedonia and Greece. Even though they don't include Greece on this map, it's included. And the other part is Asia. Now, the reality of what we're going to be reading is that this one and this one become the dominant ones. They're the most powerful one. And this is the one that gets focused on. Why? Because that's the one from which the Antichrist will come. And we talked about that last week. So just to remember what the argument is, we know that within the old Roman Empire, which ends right about here, okay? Take these rivers, right between where the Seleucid and the Empire are, that's where Rome ends. It goes to there, it does not go further. And it's going to have 10 horns in there, and there's going to be a horn that rises from outside of it, not one of those 10, that's going to capture 3. Then we look at the 4 horns of the goat in Daniel's vision, and we know that out of one of those horns, a little horn arises. So there's 4 of them. So we pick the one that's not part of the Roman Empire, and that's this one, okay? This land, by the way, is very what they call Asian in character. It was very different from Greek. The Greeks considered the Persians like low-life scum of the earth, okay? Greeks thought they were far superior, and much of the stuff that you read in history is written by who? The Greeks. So everything you get is sort of colored. Remember, history is always written by the victors because there's anything left of the people that lost. And so the Greeks get to write about a lot of it. But this is a very Asian in character part of the empire. This one is very Egyptian, which is slightly different, and the rest of this is very, very Greek in its character. So that's where we are. So I just want to, because I misspoke, because I got ahead of myself, I want to clarify that so that we all get it straight. The vision that he's talking about when he said 21 days and that you want to see it is really the vision of Christ Jesus that he sees. And that happens in the 3rd year of Cyrus. And it's important to understand that the reason we want to do chronology is we get these things right when they occur. What we're about to read is a vision that he had in the 1st year of Darius the Mede. Okay, that means that 1st year after Belshazzar went down. So we're sort of out of order here. Okay, and I just got ahead of myself and said something that wasn't true. It's just always frustrating to do that. But the Greek Empire here, we're going to learn a lot more about it in this next section. So let's think about our timeline for a moment. Just picture with me. I'm going to start, over here in the ancient past, and I'm going to move that way into the future. Okay? It starts out with Babylon, the head of gold. We're talking about Daniel in time. You are the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar. Babylon is depicted as a lion with wings, very powerful. What comes after it is the Medo-Persian Empire. It's the next on the docket. And we've got that. And that lasts till about 330 BC, so you understand, before Jesus. Because in 332, I believe it is, somebody comes out of the west. This, Macedon, is west of the Persian Empire. Comes out of the west, this goat with one big notable horn sticking out of his head comes rushing out and conquers Persia. We just learned a little bit more about that. We learned it in the context of a vision of the Son of Man, a vision of Jesus, a vision of God. And that's why Daniel can't stand up. That's why he's saying, how can I speak to my Lord? I'm a servant of how can the servant of my Lord speak to my Lord? How can I even talk to you? That's just, I can't do that. But yet he's strengthened, and then he can talk to him. So he sees this vision. What is the purpose of everything we're seeing in Daniel? And I want to emphasize this. The purpose is that we can understand what's going to happen in the last days. That is the purpose. People often will say, oh, you don't need to know anything about all that. They call it eschatology stuff. It's the big fancy word, right, for end time stuff. No, it's a big subject in the Bible. Why is it? Because one of the things you will learn is the wrath of God is real. Eternal judgment is real. You have to know that. People have to understand that. I was emphasizing in Romans earlier about the dichotomy between the path you can go by that leads to death and the path you can go by that leads to life. And if there's no eternal judgment, what difference does it make? So many people say it doesn't make any difference, but they're wrong. It does make a difference. All of Daniel is meant to lead us to an understanding of when is the kingdom of Jesus going to be here. So that's the culmination of everything for him. The last vision is he sees Jesus. Okay, so now we're at 332, and the Grecians have just blasted the Persians. And he eventually conquers Babylon here. He comes all the way from Macedonia, conquers all the way through here, conquers Babylon, goes down into Egypt, conquers Egypt, comes back, starts moving this direction, and he gets all the way to the border of India and fights some elephants and things in India, and his troops rebel and basically say, we don't want to go any further. We're so far from home now, we don't want to go any further. And so he turns back and he heads back to Babylon. So he comes back from his extent here, comes all the way back to Babylon, and there he dies at an age of like 32 or something, 32 or 33, he dies. And what then happens to that Grecian empire as we move forward in time, now that Alexander's dead, there becomes the wars of successions. Because Alexander left no heir. He had a couple of kids, but they weren't royal kids fully because they were the sons of princesses of various places they conquered, but they were not Macedonian, which at that time in that people was extremely important to them. So there was attempts to set some of his children on the throne, but they actually were all killed. Because one of the things you do when you're trying to take the throne yourself is you kill all the other people that could take it. That's what you do. in these days. It's pretty brutal and ugly, but that's what they did. So these wars of succession are what we're in now in the timeline. Greece, has the notable horn's been broken. And now, has it actually happened in Daniel's time? No, it hasn't happened. But he's seen it now. And there's that little horn. He keeps focusing on that little horn, the little horn with the 10, the little horn with the 4. He's focused on that. What's that all about? Because that's got to happen before he gets to the final, which is the final vision was in chapter 10. So in chapter 11, he begins to see this. Now, when we read this, there's a lot of words here, and they can be a little hard to follow. So let me just prepare you for this, because I'm going to skip through it for the interest of time. What's going on is the king of this part, the Seleucid Empire, is called the king of the north. The king of the Egyptian part, the Ptolemaic Empire, is called the king of the south. These guys alternately fight, and they particularly fight over this area, Jerusalem, Syria, Damascus area. They fight over this. Who's going to get it? They also work with one another and with these people to fight each other to some degree, trying to gain the preeminence. Okay? When you study the detailed kings of the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire, everything that is stated in this chapter you can find. Does that mean that we know the full fulfillment of everything that's in here? I don't believe it necessarily does. Because there are many things with double fulfillment, and we're going to talk about one of those very specifically in this thing. The fact remains, though, that if I study these, if you go and just look on Wikipedia or something and you find the kings of the Seleucid Empire, you're going to be able to find a lot of the names that I'm going to mention to you, and you can follow through on who they are. And you'll see that it's remarkably accurate, which is why so many critics of the Bible say it couldn't have been written by Daniel in the first year of Darius the Mede, because it's too accurate. It had to be written after the fact. That's how accurate it is. Okay? But we don't believe that, because the Bible makes it very clear that he saw it in the first year of Darius the Mede, right? So, now I will show you the truth. Verse 2. Behold, there shall stand yet 3 kings in Persia. The 4th shall be far richer than they all. Okay, so who is it? I didn't write this down, so let me just write it down for you so you can take notes on it. It's in some of the other things we've done. But we had Cyrus, right? And after Cyrus comes his son Cambyses. And after him, because his son, who's sometimes said to be Guatemata, who is somebody who's a sorcerer who's pretending to be him. And then comes the 4th one, which is known as Darius. This Darius is one of the most powerful. He's the one that one of the things that helps us to know a little bit about what's going on this time in Persia, because there's very little, by the way. He put on the mount in Behistun, he put a relief that is like up the mountain as high as the top of this, and then it goes up from there, and it's this gigantic picture of him standing there with all of his genealogy and who he is and declaring how powerful he is in 3 different languages. And it's way up on the side of a mountain. It's massive. Kind of scary to go there these days, because it's not a place that's very fun for Westerners to go right now. But it's on a very important trade route coming from the east and to the west. And that's this guy. He put that on there. So it says here that there will be yet 3 kings. So we got Cyrus. That's where he's standing there, right? And is at the beginning of Cyrus is taking over. And there's Darius the Mede. But there's the Cyrus, because he's talking about the Persians, 3 kings in Persia. 1, 2, 3. The 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all the realm against the realm of Grecia. So who's that? So we talked about 3 yet, and then there'll be a 4th. And he is commonly called Xerxes. Probably heard this term. Now, there's some confusion sometimes between Xerxes and Artaxerxes, and maybe people have been called both. There is a traditional name for all the kings. After Xerxes comes Artaxerxes the first, but there may be times when you read an ancient literature and Xerxes is called Artaxerxes as well. And it's one of the reasons it gets confusing, because this is likely the king who Esther married. But it calls him Ahasuerus, which is also the name of a Median father of a king, and it seems to be titular. In other words, it's a title. The Artaxerxes is actually, there's stuff where her husband is called Artaxerxes. So if it's this guy, why is he called Artaxerxes? Maybe it's the Artaxerxes that's after. So you get these confusions about who we're talking about. If everybody's named Dan Brown, and you know, how do you tell the difference? Which Dan Brown is it? Which Joe Smith is it? Which, you know, whatever it might be. So there'll be yet 3 kings. Darius, big time dude. You got to just know who he is, because he is huge. He extends the empire far beyond where Cyrus gave it to him. And Xerxes then is the 4th, and what he says about the 4th, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And that happened. So what happened was that Xerxes has got a kingdom that goes all the way to here. Okay? It's all the way out here. And he's got Greek people that live in his kingdom. They're subservient to him. But they keep causing him trouble. And they keep sending over here to Athens and to Sparta saying, hey, come help us against the Persians. And there's all sorts of stories about this, because this is the time when people begin to write history. So there's just all kinds of data on it. And he's sitting there, well, he's the one who goes over here and fights at that really famous battle that everybody likes to make movies about the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. And that stirs up the Grecians. Now we've got a war on our hands. And there are many years that pass. It's not till many, many kings later that Alexander the Great shows up. But the wars with Persia, it's huge. There's a lot of historians, Greek historians of the day, that write incredible anti-Persian stuff. It's kind of like reading propaganda from World War II, you know, today, that just makes your skin want to crawl. You know how, like, if you read anti-Japanese propaganda, it is so racist and so awful what they say. You know, it's despicable. You sit there and go, are you kidding? We did that? You know, I remember going and looking political propaganda against Abraham Lincoln, that terrible abolitionist that they would call him. I mean, some of it's just absolutely horrible. You think it's all bad today. It was bad in the past too. But the propaganda the Greeks wrote about the Persians is just amazing. So anyway, he stirs up all against the realm of Grecia. That's when that begins. It does not culminate for many years, okay? Because this is 539. This is 480, somewhere in that realm, when that happens. And it's not till 332 that Alexander defeats the Persians. So it's quite a bit late, 150 years later. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken. And who's that? A mighty king shall stand up, verse 3, rule with great dominion, do according to his will. That's Alexander. We've already read about him. When he shall stand up, the kingdom shall be broken, shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity. Remember I told you that none of his children actually reigned. Not according to his dominion which he ruled. Nobody rules the whole thing. There were a number of people who tried. And they fought wars with one of these. Wars of succession went on for years. There was all kinds of movement, okay? Not according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others besides those. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And early on, the Ptolemies, they were the ones with the most established empire. They got a hold of Egypt, and they held it, and they never let it go. The last Ptolemy was Cleopatra, dealing with the Romans. In the end of years, verse 6, they joined themselves together. For the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. And that actually happened. Her name was Bernice, just in case you're wondering. And she was the daughter of Ptolemy, and she was given to the Seleucid king as his wife to make peace. And they did, because they were kind of fighting over various things. And that actually happened, just like it says. And in the, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. You go, that doesn't make any sense. The reality is, it didn't work. That's what that's telling you. Because what actually occurred was they all got in a fight with one another, and she didn't stay doing what she was going to do, and it kind of got ugly, okay? And that actually happened. Verse 7, but out of the branch of her roots, so one of her descendants, shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and deal against them, and shall prevail. So one of her children becomes king of the Seleucid Empire. Okay, and that happens. And then there's a new dynasty there. It's actually related to the old one, but what you'll find when you study the kings of the Seleucid Empire is there's a lot of, a king goes down, his son takes over, then a different one of his sons, and then a son of the first one, and so there's a lot of sort of confusion as it goes. It's not just simple, son to son to son kind of stuff. Verse 8, he shall also carry captives into Egypt, their gods with their princes, with their precious vessels of silver, gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So basically, Ptolemies are now ascendant because of all this that happens, right? Verse 9, so the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return to his own land. He wins, goes back home. And that happened. But his son shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, very angry, shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, and shall set forth a great multitude. But the multitude shall be given into his hand, into the hand of the king of the north. So now it changes, and this actually happened. The Seleucids became dominant over the Ptolemies. And when he has taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. For the king of the north shall return and set forth a multitude greater than the former, and certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that comes against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. So who are we talking about now? There's a very famous guy. You've heard his name in different ways. The best way to say his name, as I've been able to understand, is he's Antiochus IV, known as Epiphanes. Okay, some people say Epiphanes. It's Epiphanes, apparently. Yeah, I should write that. That's who he's talking about now, is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And he is famous for one thing, being incredibly wicked. Okay? He's a bad guy. And he shall stand in the glorious land. Where is the glorious land? That's Jerusalem. That's Israel. It's the glorious land. What did Antiochus do? We're going to read about it here. His hand, and which by his hand shall be consumed, and he did that. And he shall set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. He will give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she will not stand on his side, neither before him. So his wife actually separated from him. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. So, I mean, the words are tough to do. You have to go line them up against what actually happens. But he becomes very powerful. And he's spreading out from his Seleucid Empire down to the glorious land. He's pressing on Egypt, and he's moving out to these isles. Okay? That's just so you see what's going on there. Where was I? Then shall stand up, verse 20, a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province. He's going to do all these things, stir up power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. The king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him. In other words, those that he thinks are on his side, they eat his food, will destroy him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it will not prosper, for yet the end shall be at a time appointed. Then shall he return unto his land with great riches. His heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits, return to his own land. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former, as the latter. This war goes on. Let's just make it simple for you. This war goes on between these two. And different ones are more powerful at different times. I just want to find what I'm looking for. I know it's in here. Neither shall, verse 37, he shall regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his father knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things, and etc. And then out of Edom and Moab shall come places, and Ethiopians, and etc. Before I go on, understand something now. All of this is happening about 160 BC. That's 160 years thereabouts before Jesus shows up on the scene. It's a very big deal to understand that everything that happens here cannot be what Jesus is prophesying is going to come in the last days, because it happened before Jesus, right? Do you understand? And much of this, I believe, has double fulfillment, because what we've just entered into, you'll see the character begins to change. We're entering into descriptions of what's going to happen in the last days. We're entering into the Antichrist. It's fulfilling what we've already told you, which is that these things are going to happen according to the book of Daniel telling us where the Antichrist will rise from, and we know where he rises from. He rises from the Seleucid Empire. So all the things that we see these Seleucid kings doing, the wickedness that they do, these are all shadows of what the Antichrist will do. Just like the four divisions that were divided in various ways, they're going to be more defined in the last days when it happens. When you read this, verse 44, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. That's very similar to Matthew 24, 25, Revelation. Talks about those things. Chapter 12, we'll move into something else. I'm going to save that for later. One of the things that Antiochus IV did at this time was he went in and he desolated the temple of God. He went in and put up an altar to Zeus in the temple in place of the altar of God. And many people say that he is sort of the model for what the Antichrist would do when he sets up what Jesus said as the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. He's the model for what will happen in the end. And he comes during this time. Now there's something else that I just want to comment on that comes this time, because I feel like I've done a horrible job of sort of making this clear. I thought it was going to be clearer to me as I said it. It is a very hard thing to go through. These words are not always clear. And I understand the early ones much better than I understand the later ones, but it all follows along with what occurs in the King of the North and the King of the South. And I think that's the thing I want you to know here, because we're doing, an overview of the book. There's a lot of detail. There have been many academic papers written about this stuff. And you can go and read them, and they don't always agree. But this that is going on, why is Daniel seeing this? Because he keeps asking the question, I want to know more about that last thing. I want to know more about the kingdom of heaven coming down and reigning over everything. I want to know about that guy. I want to know the Lord that I saw and the glory of what he's done. These are the things I want to know. And so he's showing him very clearly how it's going to happen. And we see in the 160s, we see shadows of what's going to happen. And we see the King of the North and the King of the South fighting. When the Antichrist rises, you study the Antichrist and you find out about him, one of the first places he could take is Egypt. Because he's going to fight with the King of the South, he's going to overcome him. And the Antiochus family did that. And they became that powerful. Who defeated them? Anybody know? Anybody can guess? Who? You are absolutely correct. Extra points for Zoe. The Romans did. The Romans defeated them in a couple of really big battles and knocked them down and took over the western part of their empire, but never were able to move into the other. You'll see that word over there to the right. It says Parthia. The Parthians are not the Seleucids, but they develop an empire after the Seleucids get defeated, and the Parthians are able to hold off the Romans and keep them out of the eastern part of the Seleucid Empire. It's a separate empire that rose. Anyway, I digress. The point of this is that we know now where this little horn is coming from, and we're getting more detail about how it will be. And just like it was in the 160s, it's going to be in the latter days, only more so. And what you're seeing in chapter 11 is that. We're going to do chapter 12 next week, and we're going to sort of clarify some of this a little bit more for you so we make sure that it's very clear. The fact of the matter is, just so you can see it now, Nebuchadnezzar asked God about the last days, and he sees a vision. Daniel gets to see the vision and interpret it for him. And Daniel gets to then go forth and have more visions of his own with deeper and deeper detail into one thing, the end of it all. Remember the mountain? Everybody talks about the statue with the head of gold, but they keep forgetting about the stone cut out without hands that comes down and bashes the feet and becomes a great mountain in and of itself. That's what Daniel's interested in. And then he's interested in that last beast. He says, what about that terrible, awful beast with the 10 horns? He's interested because that's the last days. He's seeing that, and so he's wanting to know about that. Then he sees a vision of the Son of Man. He sees a vision of Jesus. Now he's really overwhelmed, with what's going to happen. But the Antichrist is the focus. Because why? Because it's the sign of the end. It's when everything of sin gets gathered together and he becomes known as the man of sin. And he leads many astray. And it's very clearly laid out. You follow him, you get destroyed. You resist and go against him, you can be saved. I mean, it's just like we were talking about in Romans. There's the dichotomy between the two, and it makes it very clear. And it fits very clearly with the doctrine of God, which is eternal judgment. There will be an eternal judgment. And we have to know it's true. And Daniel's very interested in it. And we're going to read in chapter 12 next time and dig into it. And then we're going to have a couple classes for review, which is going to be good. We're going to go back over everything in total. But this section, which is very hard to read because it uses such flowery language and words that are very vague in the way that they come across, just take it. Remember the early ones that I was able to remember how to tell it to you. These things happened. And this war went on. And it is a shadow of the future. And Daniel saw it and said, that's where it is. So we started with the Antichrist being a little horn outside of the 10 horns of that big beast. We narrowed it down to which of the horns of the goat. We've now narrowed it down to which horn that is. and it's the king of the north. And the Antichrist called elsewhere the king of the north. That's the point, is it narrows it all down and makes it absolutely clear so that there's no argument. Somebody says that the Antichrist comes out of Italy, out of Rome, you know they're wrong. Somebody says the Antichrist comes out of, Mussolini back in the 40s. It was Mussolini from Italy because, he's from Rome. So he must be the Antichrist. Hitler was the Antichrist. A lot of other people have been called the Antichrist. They're all Antichrists in many different ways. And as John says, there are many Antichrists, but the one known as the Antichrist, the man of sin, will come out of there, which is absolutely proven in the book of Daniel. Okay? I hope that was all right. Read 11, kind of look at it. I will try to put something together that kind of lays out an outline of what these are. I'd hoped that I could read it and just begin to tell it to you just as a way of preliminary doing it, but I feel like I failed a bit on doing that. But it's there. So bless you all. I think we can be done. So does anybody here have any questions? Oh, I thought that's what that was.